Welcome to Let's Relieve Regret, the uplifting podcast where we talk about how to relieve what you're worrying about.
It can feel so good to finally let go. Let go of past hurts, let go of old grudges, let go of self-doubt, self-shame.
The thing is, we aren't always given the tools to let go. We're told to get over it, or it's time to move on. But how do we do that?
We will share our stories, tools, and strategies of how we let go to help you let go.
Let's begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another fantastic episode of the Let's Relieve Regret podcast. My name is Victoria Muir-Bercia, and I am one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host,
Shadoe Ball.
And welcome, everybody, to the experience, because it is an experience.
It really is, for sure.
It really is. Whether you're listening and you relate to what we're saying, or whether you come on the show as a guest, we're always looking for guests if you want to come and tell your story about regret. Or also, announcement, we made this in the last podcast too, we'll also be doing a new kind of mini episode called Let's Relieve Regret Anonymous, where you can write into us your regrets. And we will read them and provide feedback to them without mentioning your name. We will just read what you wrote and not your name. So if you have a regret that you would like to share, and you'd like us to read it out, and provide feedback, you can apply to have your letter read on our mini-sodes called the Let's Relieve Regret Anonymous.
I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. So welcome to the experience of Let's Relieve Regret. Our goal, everybody, is to relieve regret, to know that we're all not alone. We all share similar things that embarrass us, or experiences, or shame, and how can we let go of the shame and let go of the guilt and the regret. And often the best way to do that is by telling stories and by having a caring person listen to those stories to help you feel like you're still loved and that you're still a human being and there is no shame in these things. And then you are able to let them go. So that's what we're doing here. But before we get into our regrets today, we always like to do a check-in. How are you feeling today, Shadoe, on a scale of 1 to 10?
I gotta give today about a 7. It's been a bit of a weird week, but it's never fun when like your kids, or in my scenario, my pet is injured. So we've been taking her to the vet. She has a follow-up appointment on Monday. She's taking it really easy this week. And my heart just breaks for her because she's such an active little dog. And like right now she has to take it easy. And I can tell that like mentally she's like not into it. But physically she's been into getting picked up and stuff. And like, so it's so funny. Sometimes when I'm walking her and she's being kind of slow, I'll be like, hey, do you need me to pick you up? And she'll speeds right up. Like she's like, no, I don't want to be picked up. But right now, because she's in like so much pain, like
It's her leg, right?
It's her leg. So we
Yeah.
carry her outside. She doesn't have to like, be on, like she's on leash, but she's not walking on leash to the elevator. So we carry her down the elevator, we go outside, we let her do her business, and then we carry her home. And like when I say like, do you want to be picked up, she just like looks at me, and like I put my arm down and she puts her 2 little front legs on my arm and I pick her up. And it's like it's fun because it's like so consent based. Like it's so clearly like I'm not just picking her up because she's a little dog. I always ask her first. And right now the fact that she's like willing to be picked up is actually breaking my heart a little bit. But also because dogs pick up, and I'm sure cats pick up on our like mood as well, that like
Pick
I'm
up on
trying
our
to
anxiety.
yeah. So I'm also trying to just give her like a lot of positive like face and not show that I'm crying inside. Yeah. So I overall about a 7, because like I'm grateful that I have a vet that will get her fixed up, but just in this in-between time I'm not feeling my best because my Gertie girl is not feeling her best. How about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of like in this place today where you can feel more than one thing at the same time.
Nice.
So I'm really tired. I only have 2 weeks left of rowing season, so I've been waking up at 4:30 pretty much 5 days a week.
Wow.
So like my body's really tired, and I didn't have a nap today. I just couldn't. Like usually I come home and then I have a 45-minute nap, and I was just like, tried to have a nap and I tossed and turned in the bed, but mentally I'm feeling pretty focused and pretty
Nice.
energetic. It's just physically I'm tired. So I don't know. What do you give that? A
Yeah.
7.5, maybe
Sure.
6.5, 7? Yeah, because I'm like
Yeah.
feeling two things at the same time. I have energy to think, but my body is like, oh, because I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably why I couldn't nap because my brain was
Yeah.
probably thinking. But yeah.
Potentially. I think that happens to all of us. Like it's two things let me know I'm really like overdrawn on my like energy levels. And that's one of them, being too tired to sleep or being too hungry to eat. Like both things let me
Oh,
know
that's a
that I'm
good one
just
too, being
like
too hungry to eat.
I'm just not at my best when either of those things are happening.
So interesting. That's a good
Mm-hmm.
point too.
Yeah.
Do you have a cause for applause now that you just told us poor
Oh. Oh
Gertie?
yeah.
But
It's
is there
also
anything
kind of
joyful
related.
happening in your life?
Well, this is more a cause for curiosity. So
Mm.
I was walking along the waterfront with Gertie about a month ago, back when, her leg wasn't in pain. And I stepped on something and I didn't realize I had stepped on it until I walked a few more steps and I could hear this tapping sound, like a tap shoe, like a dance
Yeah.
tap shoe. And I'm looking around to like look for the cause of the sound, but then I take a couple more steps and I hear it, and then I stop and I don't hear it because I didn't realize I had stepped on something. But I stepped on this pin,
Oh,
and it's really beautiful. Like it's about an inch across. It's a circle. It's got like a buffalo on it wearing a really beautiful like necklace, I guess.
and it's
And
gold, like
and
it's a
it's
gold medal.
gold, and it has like the four indigenous colors in like little circles around it. So I found that on my shoe. When I found it, I kind of just was like, oh, that's weird. Took it off my shoe because it didn't like go into my foot or anything. It just went into my shoe.
Hmm.
And so I put it in my purse. And then today I was going through my purse and I found it again. And so I did Google Lens and I found that it's from an Indigenous artist who lives in Ontario, nowhere near Toronto, but still lives in Ontario. And we have another connection in that we're both Trent alumni. So I sent him an email today.
Awesome. I
I
love
haven't heard
this.
back. I haven't heard back yet because it seemed like, again, this is what I'm saying. It's a cause for curiosity because like it could just be random chance, right? That I
Yeah.
stepped on this thing, but I don't know. There's something about it that's pulling me. Like it's pulling me towards like I should find out more about what this symbol is, and maybe the artist can tell me more. And then I'm extremely hopeful that like maybe because it is from a local artisan and not just like mass produced, maybe whoever bought it is looking for it and I could like return it to the proper owner.
Yeah.
That would be really cool for me. So I know that's such a long shot, but I even put that in the email. I was like, anyway, I don't even know why I'm emailing you other than just I found this thing and now I'm like really curious about it. And maybe that's my own stuff where like I try to put meaning on something that's just random. But I don't know, there's like a je ne sais quoi about this that makes me feel like it's not random.
How do I say this? It's good learning. It's good education. And
Mm-hmm.
and like it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that like you sent the email. When did you send the email?
Today. Because
Yeah,
I
right.
totally forgot about it. It was in the it was like, it was in it I took it off my shoe right away because I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I just kind of threw it in my purse and never looked at it again until today. And yeah.
I think like when these opportunities arise to like learn more, have these discussions, learn about the symbol, that's what truth and reconciliation, that's part of what truth and reconciliation is
Mm.
about too. And
Mm-hmm.
so being open to learning and understanding. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great that you sent the email.
Well, and only through
Yeah.
going to his website that I even realized it was a clan pin. I kind of thought it was, and to be honest, I look at it and I can see that it's a buffalo, but I kind of thought maybe it was like a year of the ox or like a more astrological thing. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even
Mm-hmm.
consider it to be like an indigenous thing, even though now that I've Google lensed it, found it on his website, I can see the indigenous influence in the pin now. But that was not my first thought when I stepped on it and became inadvertent tap dancer along the waterfront for about 20 steps. But
So
yeah.
serendipitous education or serendipitous
Yeah.
connection or the universe or
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it. That's cool. I like that
exactly.
as a cause for pleasure. You'll have to follow up. I
Yeah.
want to know what the artist says, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd love
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear the end of this story.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or how I'd love to hear wherever this story goes.
Yeah, yeah. And even if it goes nowhere, I'm proud that I didn't just like not lean in.
Yeah,
Because I think
exactly.
there's lots of
Yeah.
times where like something like this will happen and I'm so afraid of looking like woo woo, like you're saying, that I'm like, no, I'm just gonna pretend that this never happened. Versus like, well, again, I know that there's so many things that are random and we can't just ascribe meaning to everything that happens to
But it's
us.
also okay
But
to believe in magic or to believe in energy
yeah.
or to believe in you've heard me say this before, like inspired action, right? Like when
Mm-hmm.
the brain or the universe or whatever you want to call it brings you a thought or something happens, like you still chose to take the action, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of magic that you found this, there's coincidence or magic, whatever you want to call it, but you still are like, what this is. And then, the
Mm-hmm.
artist, right? So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
woo woo, but there's also action there, right? And
Yeah.
it's cool to like follow the paths that are thrown at us sometimes. Maybe it's not
Mm-hmm.
the big paths because we're scared of the big paths or whatever,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
follow
Yeah.
the little paths that get thrown at us sometimes and
Mm-hmm.
go on a little adventure.
For
Maybe it's not
sure.
a physical adventure, it's an intellectual adventure or a thinking adventure, or what did you call it? Cause for curiosity,
Yeah.
right? But go on a little adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just go on a little adventure. So I'd be
Yeah.
really curious to see where the adventure takes you
Yeah, me too.
and what you've learned.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely keep you updated. And what about you? What's your cause for applause this week?
My cause for applause is, I guess, simple.
Okay.
It's just sleep.
Nice.
Like, it's literally sleep, sunshine, water, and like nurturing my body. And I mean, this is gonna sound weird, and maybe we get Louise come back on and talk about this,
Mm-hmm.
our new friend that's a nutritionist, but I started taking creatine.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a supplement. If you don't know what it is, everybody, it's something that our body naturally produces, but you can take it as a supplement as well to give your body more, because there's been all of these studies recently about creatine in women and women over 40.
Okay.
Whereas they used to think that creatine originally as a supplement was just like bodybuilders would take it, like people that were competing
Mm.
in like Mr. Universe or whatever, because
Yeah.
it helps you build muscle. But now there's been these recent studies around creatine in women, because as we know, everybody, there's never been, like until recently, all the study, like medical studies, any kind of studies were just done on men,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we didn't have studies that were giving us more information about women in the healthcare field. And now they're saying for women, especially over 40, so when we're getting into that perimenopause and stuff like that, helps us keep muscle on, helps with brain fog, helps with sleep,
Mm.
um, helps with like recovery from working out, helps with stiffness, helps with lean muscle mass, like so many things. And so I decided to do an experiment to start taking it. And the studies are all saying it's very safe to take. Your body produces it on its own.
Mm.
And I'm sleeping better and I feel like a superhero. Honestly, when I'm at the gym, I'm like, I can lift heavier. Like it's crazy how much I feel like a superhero. And it also helps with energy, that I actually have more energy. After I just said my cause for my
Right, right,
like check-in was that I'm
right.
tired. But
Yeah.
to be honest, if I compare where I like this time of year to last year at this time of year, where I was doing the same thing, I was getting up at 4:30 every morning, and it's like almost the end of the season. It's 2 weeks until the last race of the year. I was just completely bagged,
Right.
like completely exhausted. And yes, my body's exhausted today, but my mind isn't. And that's the difference. Whereas last year, we could probably go back and find a podcast that we recorded this time last year.
Mm.
And my check-in was probably like, I'm so tired and brain foggy, right? So
Right.
um it's been an interesting, curious experiment for me too. Like I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
an experiment on my body and you're doing an
Right.
experiment with like, right? But yeah, I feel like a rock star. Like I feel like a
Nice.
superhero. I feel like
Cool.
a superhero in terms of energy when I'm at the gym or when I'm going on my walks. Like I feel like a superhero, and I feel like a superhero in my mind too. Like my
Yeah.
brain is more clear. So it's been really interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know the difference, but do you or can you explain the difference between like creatine and creatinine? Like, isn't there like two things that sound really close?
Yeah. There's creatinine and creatine.
So what does that little extra IN mean?
Creatine is like what the supplement is that I'm taking. It's
Right.
produced by your muscles, right? And
Okay.
when your muscles use the creatinine is the byproduct
Okay.
of using the creatine.
Right.
So
Cool.
that's what they would test for in your blood. They would look at your creatinine levels, but it's
Yeah.
creatine that's creating the creatinine. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because when you said that at first, I was like, oh, I know that the last time I got blood work, this came up. But then I was like, oh, like creatine is in this. And my doctor was like, that's not the same thing. And I was like, oh, and then I never looked it up. So
Yes. So the
I'm glad you did.
creatinine is a byproduct of the creatine. Yeah.
Okay,
So
interesting.
creatine is a natural part. The muscles make it to build muscle whenever you use your muscles, and the creatinine is what happens after the process of processing the creatine. So that's what they're looking
Cool.
for in your blood. Yeah. That's a great
Yes.
question, actually. Total sidebar here.
Yeah.
But years ago, and again, this was when I was having my I don't think you've ever heard this story, Shadow.
Mm.
When I like 2, 3 years before I had my total burnout, where I like my body shut down and I was paralyzed, my body actually shut down a few years before that too, but in a different way.
Mm.
I was working out really hard. And I think we talked about this last time or the time before, like being addicted to physical activity because you can get
Okay.
addicted to the dopamine. So there's this thing where, like, if you're really overwhelmed, a lot of people are like, I'm going to work out as my self care, but we end up getting addicted to the dopamine. And it's not actually helping you
Mm.
deal with the stress and the overwhelm because you're getting that dopamine hit when you're working out, but you're not actually making changes in your life to actually resolve the stress and the worry and the things that are actually causing you overwhelm. So it's like a coping mechanism. And we
Right.
mistake that coping mechanism for healing.
Right.
And this is actually common too, is I actually had a situation where I was working out so much because I was addicted to the dopamine high as a coping mechanism for the amount of stress I was under at work, at home, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And my body got confused and got into a loop of producing too much creatinine and trying to
Mm.
heal my muscles. So it started eating my muscles to
Mm.
create creatine because you need protein to make creatine. So it started eating my
Right.
muscles to create creatine to process the part of my muscles that I was using. And then my creatinine levels were so high that I actually had to be hospitalized.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just like a biofeedback loop that went wrong in my system.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my creatinine levels were really high in my blood. And then I had to get like a drip, like
Oh, wow.
like an IV drip to help my body process it out and reset my body. That was because had so much cortisol in my body that I wasn't really processing
Mm.
anything properly. So I
Right.
was working out so hard and my body wasn't able to recover from working out hard because I was also during the day in fight, flight, or freeze all the time. So my body thought it was working out so hard all day long too.
Mm.
So, like,
It's tough.
other signs you can look for, right? When you're overwhelmed. But again, that is different from the creatine supplement I'm taking. So that's
Right.
a really good question, right? People are like, well, you had that issue with your creatinine. Taking the creatine going to harm that? I'm like, no, it's actually going to make it better because I'm
Okay.
giving my body what it needs. It needs the creatine
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to recover my muscles.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a really good question. Great question, Shadow.
Thank you. It was for me just completely curious because mine were like slightly elevated and now they're back into normal range. So I don't know exactly what
Yeah,
I
so that can
changed,
be a
but
sign of stress, right? It can be a sign that your body isn't regenerating cells at the
mm-hmm.
speed it should be. Like it's not
Right.
regenerating your muscle cells when you're using your muscle cells at the speed it should be. So it's trying to make some more creatine
Mm-hmm.
and higher creatinine to like heal your muscles so that you can be functional. So it can be a sign of stress, right?
Interesting.
And
Cool.
like it was a sign of stress for me so much that
Yeah.
like my arms swelled because it was happening in my arms because they were like
Mm,
inflamed because I was
right.
literally eating my own muscle. Yet another story of Victoria's overwhelm training. But like, this was like 15 years ago now, I think. And
Right.
I look back, and that's what this podcast is about too. Like looking back, what are the regrets, learning? I'm like, wow, wee wee. Like I had like a 10-year period where I was just so stressed out and overwhelmed, but convincing myself that I was fine. And I think there's
Mm,
so many people doing that,
yeah, yeah,
right? There's
yeah.
so many people doing that are listening to this right now, where we're like convincing ourselves are fine or that we're coping fine, and we're
Mm-hmm.
not. And that's part of the reason, again, why we made this podcast, why I have my business where I teach wellness classes online, is we don't need coping strategies. We actually need healing strategies.
Right. Right.
There's a difference. And like
Yeah.
what we're demonstrating here is a healing strategy, because coping isn't fixing the problem. We're just
Mm-hmm.
masking it and telling ourselves that we're fine.
Yeah. But also sometimes that's what's needed, right? Like some people just don't have, like some people are just so max stressed out that they just don't like, or maybe they just perceive that they don't have the time to fix it, and then they just punt it down the road, down the road, down the road, but then down the road never comes. So
Yeah.
um like if you are in this situation right now, we're hearing you. We don't want you to feel like you have to like stop everything and change, because that's way too tough for our brains to deal with. Neither of us are medical professionals or therapy or therapists. So a lot of our stuff has come from just like curiosity about human like nature and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah. I will say though that like I do have a degree in health, and
Right.
I
Yes.
am a certified like brain fitness instructor, life coach, and personal trainer. So I'm not a medical
Absolutely.
professional, but I do come from a science-based background in talking about these things. But yeah, and that's also one of the other things is like, then we think we need to change everything when we realize we're overwhelmed. But again, and I
Mm-hmm.
say this a lot, small and slow solutions. There's no magic
Mm-hmm.
pill, but if you can make one 60-second change a day,
Right. Yep.
start with doing something for 60 seconds. Or maybe it's listening to this podcast on the way to work every
Right.
day. And then
Right.
you feel heard. And then you get the 3 breaths at the end of the podcast or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. Right. But like, you have to start somewhere. You can't just keep pushing it down and saying, I'll get to it later. Because if you do that, then you're going to be forced to get to it later, like I was.
Mm-hmm.
And like, there are small things that you can do every day to start to integrate into your life that are realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That are
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to show here, and what many of our guests have come on and talked about too, or talked about what their strategies have been and things like that. So yeah, you got to make little changes at some point. You got to start to take control. You got to start to be real with yourself about where you're at, and start to, I feel like I might have said this last time too, but maybe my brain is foggy today after I said all that. I don't know. But I had this really great quote that I feel like I said it here, but standing up for yourself does not make you difficult, and loving yourself does not make you selfish.
Mm.
I've heard that quote, but I would also say it instead of loving yourself, or loving yourself and looking after yourself does not make you selfish.
Right.
Right? Standing up for yourself does not make you difficult, and loving yourself and looking after yourself does not make you selfish.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you a functioning human being so that you can give back to the people you love, so that you can give back to society. But it has
Yeah.
to start with you. It
Yeah,
has
for
to start with
sure.
you. Yeah. We always get into a great tangent at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, for sure.
and,
Yeah.
that was a good one. I enjoyed that one. Is there anything else you
Mm-hmm.
want to say about it,
No, I just want to
Shadoe?
like validate that I actually think I don't get brain fog from you right now. So like I think you are making a lot of sense. It's just you might be a little tired and maybe, doubting yourself a little bit, but I think everything you've said so far makes a lot of sense. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
And you're right. You always call me out when I judge myself, and I call you out and you judge yourself.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
what good friendships are like, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that's what good friendships are like.
Yeah.
We can call each other out with kindness and say, nope, you're better than that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or this is what I see in you because I love you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to share a regret?
I am.
Okay, let's do it. You're going
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, I
I went
sure
first last
am. You
time.
did, and I have no preamble. I'm just going to jump right in.
Okay, awesome.
Great.
I'm here for it.
Wonderful. I have an experience I need to let go of in order to move forward. I regret feeling ashamed of being a picky eater. One of my core memories from my childhood is a standoff with my dad at the dinner table when I refused to eat a piece of ham. We sat there for hours until my mom made both of us go to bed. It was way past my bedtime, and we were both still sitting there staring at each other. I was about 9 or 10 years old at the time. And the fact that this is like one of my core memories, disappoints me in a lot of ways. But I think it's partly because I remember very clearly the next day, my dad saying, "What will you do when you're older and you start dating? There's no way your boyfriend's parents will put up with this." So fast forward 25 years, and I'm still a picky eater. And honestly, my husband doesn't really care, except for when I pretend I'm not. So I try to hide that I'm a picky eater. And when I do that, it always backfires. Sometimes I end up not eating at all, or eating something that will make me sick, or eating something that will make me moody, um, or just saying, like, I'm not hungry, even though I really am. The consequence of holding on to the shame around this is that it's leaked into other areas of my life. It's as if because I found someone who doesn't care that I'm a picky eater, I let that shame get in the way of being difficult in other ways. So, how else can I explain it other than like, I'm so afraid of being perceived as difficult that I just don't tell people what I really want. And I'm also afraid of making someone else feel rejected by me being too difficult. I try so hard to be low maintenance. And honestly, in a lot of ways, I really am low maintenance. But in some other ways, like really important ways, I am really, really not. I'm actually very particular about some things. But similar to hiding my picky eating, I try to hide these things in order to be perceived as more easygoing. And somewhat ironically, I've actually made it tougher to get close to the people I'm trying to protect from my, super particular ways. So I need to let go of the shame around being a picky eater. And as a kid, I did do everything I could in that specific moment with the tools I had at the time. And my tool was being a rebel and like pushing back on my dad. And even though through the next 25 years of my life, I've carried this shame with me, I have grown in some ways. I need to remind myself that being less difficult puts more pressure on the other person because I'm actually asking them to read my mind. Being direct means that we can actually have a conversation. I'm hopeful and relieved because I am currently practicing being a direct communicator, and I am worthy of advocating for my needs and wants.
I love this one so much. Do you want feedback or do you just want
Sure.
to be heard?
Yeah, sure. I can handle some feedback on this.
There's so much there. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a bigger discussion, but I want to point this one out is that
Hmm.
we are the generation that was like, finish your plate and you get in
Totally.
trouble. But it
Yeah.
actually taught us not to know when we're full.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's like all these studies around, like if a kid isn't finishing their meal, instead to ask them like, do you feel full, or like to have these conversations around food. We're
Mm-hmm.
the generation that there was no conversations around food.
Yeah, yeah,
There
yeah.
was no conversation about how your body feels. Is your stomach full? Or why don't you like that? Maybe because there's all these people that are kind of our age that are developing like not necessarily food allergies, but food sensitivities. And maybe as a child,
Mm-hmm.
your brain was trying to tell you, I'm sensitive to this food. And
Right,
that's why I
right.
don't want to finish it. So now there's like all of these like theories around how do we teach kids to eat. And we were the generation that was like, sit down, finish your plate, you're getting punished, don't waste the food.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Mm-hmm.
like, for me, my parents are true boomers. So their parents, my grandparents, went through the Depression, World
Absolutely.
War II, right? So, like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what my parents learned because they're like, finish your food, because their parents went through rationing of food, not having food available, not having an
Mm-hmm.
abundance of food, right? And so then my parents passed that down to us, right? And so these are these generational things in terms of relationships around food. So that one's interesting. And I can say, like, I had the same thing. It was like peas.
Mm-hmm.
And like I
Right.
try to hide my peas in the milk,
Right.
right? That they could see that I put my peas in the milk. My sister used to like put stuff in her napkin. Like, like you have all these little tricks, right? Or you just like
Yeah.
pretend you're sneezing and hold your napkin up to your mouth and spit it out into your napkin or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, right? Like we had these tricks. So like that part, I mean, that's a whole conversation we could have. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, like, it's so relatable because I think so many people probably have the exact same story. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
remember this one standoff where I literally sat at the table until it was dark out because I refused to eat the Brussels sprouts. And then I
Yeah.
went
Yeah.
to bed, right? Like, it's such a common story. But the thing that's really interesting that you've done, Shadoe, because you're amazing and you're introspective, is like you've related that to like behavior you have now
Mm-hmm.
that maybe is around food, but it's not actually around food.
Mm-hmm.
It's around like being perceived as being difficult
Yeah.
and your fear of that. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting that you've related it back to like food.
Yeah, it's so, I love that your examples, and this is actually, it's so funny that you would talk about both peas and Brussels sprouts. Um,
Yeah.
because I think that's what frustrated my parents even more was that kids not liking their vegetables, totally normal, even when I was growing up. And like my parents are at the tail end of that boomer generation, so same thing, like scarcity
Mhm.
and all that. But because it was meat, that seemed to be a bigger issue than just
Oh,
not
meat's
liking
expensive.
meat's
Meat's,
expensive. You
yeah,
need
high in
protein. What
nutrition.
did you
You
just
need
talk about?
protein.
Like,
Yeah.
so in that way, it was even extra frustrating because it wasn't like there was a lot of history or knowledge around, like, well, how does a kid still get protein if they're not eating meat? And
Right.
and
Yeah.
again, and
Yeah.
it wasn't like an emotional standoff either. It wasn't like I was like, oh, but the poor little animals and like they're so cute and I just don't want to eat the poor little animals.
It was
It had
like, I
nothing to
don't
do with
like
it.
this food.
I don't like this food and I still don't. Like even like to this
That was
day,
going to be my next question
I
is
have to
how do you feel about
force
it now?
myself. I have to force myself to eat chicken. I have to force myself to eat meat. But like and I've tried, I've gone vegetarian a few times and it just doesn't work for me. I do still need the chicken, I do need the eggs, I do need the dairy.
Is there any meat that
And
you do
like
like? Like, do you like beef?
no, no, I
No.
can't.
Okay.
I can't even handle it being cooked, like cooked. Like I don't like the smell of it. I mean, there's been a couple times where I've made a steak for Ben as like, a gift, and
Mhm.
the whole time it's horrible for me. I just I don't like it's something about the texture because even with chicken,
Mm.
if it's dark chicken, I can't eat it. It's like something about the idea of having flesh like in my teeth. I just gag on it. Like
You're
and
about to turn so many people vegetarian right now.
oh my God, I'm so sorry.
No, that can you do mushrooms?
Good, but that's been like only in the last few years and through
Because I
like
find like the
preparing them
texture of a
myself.
mushroom is similar to like the
Okay,
texture of
yeah,
meat.
I
So,
can't do raw mushrooms. No way could I eat a raw mushroom. But cooked mushroom, the first time I really liked mushroom was when I had it in like a ravioli, where it had
okay.
been already like made into a paste and then in the little ravioli like
Yeah.
circle.
So you like
That
the
was the
flavor, but the texture
yeah,
was
the
made different.
texture like it still has to be cooked. Like when they're spongy, I can't do a mushroom when they're spongy. So yeah, it's really tough. Because it was meat, right? Like specifically versus like
Hmm.
I would literally like I remember being a kid and one time we were having like again before I was really really adamant about not eating meat anymore. My brother and I were at the dinner table and my mom was busy and like he was like giving me Brussels sprouts and I was giving him meat and like we were trading, right? And like so like and again in that way I can see it being a huge concern. It also like became almost embarrassing at like family events Because like let's say there was a barbecue going on and then it would be like, well, Shadow's going to have cheese and lettuce on a bun, but she's not going to have any meat.
Yeah, so they wouldn't
You
like find an
know,
alternative for you.
no, yeah,
So
and then it would
then
be
it was
like
shaming. Did you
not
feel shamed?
shaming. I didn't feel shamed. I was okay eating my lettuce and cheese sandwiches. I actually kind of liked them, and to this day, I would still eat a lettuce and cheese sandwich. Like it's still, I think it was like embarrassing for them that like, what's wrong with your kid? She can't have a burger. Like, uh,
Have you ever asked them if it was embarrassing for them? Or is that your perception? Like, do you know what the actual truth is?
I haven't asked them in a long time. Like my dad, like they now remember that I don't eat meat. Like that's fine. Um, and I'm trying to be more open, right? I am, and like it's funny that you even brought up beef. Like I feel like every year I try to eat something with beef in it just to make sure I still don't like it. Or like shrimp, or like there's lots of things like that where I'm like, I want to, because your tastes do change over
Yeah,
time,
they
right? Like I
do. They
hated
do.
mushrooms, I like them now. Same thing with olives. Like I couldn't eat them as a kid, I like them now. So I'm like, okay, sometimes I am just going to try this and see if I like it. And no. um, and I also saw something interesting online just yesterday, actually, about picky eating and how it was something like children who are picky eaters don't always turn into adults who are picky eaters
Yeah.
because when you're an adult, you buy the food you like.
You have ownership
Like
over it
you
and
have
control
ownership
over
over
it.
the
Yeah.
food. So it's not, and I mean,
Yeah.
again, like there's lots of times where you have to buy or like just lean on the foods you don't like. So it's not always the case. But yeah, like, we say that kids are such picky eaters, but if they don't have control over what they're eating, like of course they're going to be picky. But yeah, and then because I found a partner who doesn't really care about that, I do feel this like overwhelming desire to be easygoing in every other aspect. Because wow, I did find a boyfriend, well, now husband, that like doesn't care about me being a picky eater. So if I overcame that, then like I should just be grateful and not try to be difficult in any other way.
Right. But that's not how the brain works, and that's not how life works, right?
Totally.
When you say things like, when you're like really sick, you have the flu, and you're like, oh my God, if I get over this, I'll be so grateful for my
Yeah.
body and I'll work out every day because I
Yeah,
won't
yeah,
feel this
yeah.
way anymore. Like that's not like we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly evolving and changing, and our thoughts are constantly processing and changing. So that's really setting a very unrealistic expectation on yourself that
Mm-hmm.
must
Mm-hmm.
feel heavy or burdensome to,
Yeah.
to set that unrealistic expectation on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing
Mm-hmm.
is that Ben probably doesn't have that expectation of like Ben probably doesn't think, oh well, she's a picky eater. I need her to be perfect in every other
No,
aspect.
of course not. Well, and again,
Right.
because I then make it a secret, right? Like it's always a secret that I'm upset until like I'm really upset. And then it's like, well, how did we go from 0 to 60? It's like, because you
Yeah.
missed 10, 20, 30, 40. Like, because I did, but
Yeah.
it's not like I told you that I was upset back when I was at like a 10. I waited until it was completely unmanageable
And
and
then you
freaked
discharged
out.
it. Then you
Yeah,
discharge it.
totally. And like, that's not getting me any closer. Plus, like, when you set this kind of stuff up, like, it almost becomes harder to change it. So back in, I think, I don't know, an earlier season, we talked about how not all connections need to be deep connections,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think what ends up happening for me is that like I start at such a, oh, I'm so easygoing. I'm Shadow. I'm here. It's cool. It's nice. Whatever you want. Like, and then as we get deeper, I don't turn the switch over to like, oh, hey, I actually don't like this, or I can't be my best self if this isn't met, or like stuff like that. So I just kind of hide that stuff.
So
But because I hide it, it can never get fixed.
is it like I'm trying to name it here, but it's more like,
Mhm.
is it people pleasing or is it like I
I think
want people to
it's,
like me?
I want people to like me. I also want people to not feel like heavy around me. I think it's part of like how you talked about how it's like such a heavy weight. I don't want other people to have to carry that weight. I don't think that that's fair to them.
Why do you think
Yeah,
they would carry it?
I
Like
don't know.
if you were having me over, for example,
Sure.
and I
Yeah.
can't eat onions,
Mm-hmm.
would you be like, oh? God, it's so annoying having Victoria over. She can't eat onions.
No, but it's not just one thing, right? Like for me, it's a list of
That's
things I
okay.
can't eat. And it becomes, in that way, it becomes burdensome.
Well,
So,
here's my again, this goes back to two things. Like you're assuming
hmm
it's burdensome. You're assuming that your parents were like ashamed that you couldn't eat the
hmm
burger and only had lettuce and cheese,
hmm
right? But there's probably a side to the story. Let me frame it this way or ask you like
hmm
if it was a food allergy and you could die from eating these things, would you put yourself at risk to please the other person and not be a burden?
I think that's such like a question that's like, well, of course not. And that's also where it becomes even trickier because none of my sensitivities are full-blown allergies. They're
Yeah, but
just things that are like,
a sensitivity, I think, is on the same level because, okay, there's
hmm
anaphylactic food allergies, you can die from them,
yeah,
right? But sensitivities, you even said it in your regret. Like, I might be moody for a couple days after, I might have a stomach
hmm
ache. Like, that really affects your quality of life.
right, right.
It really, really does. And here's the thing, I think people don't take sensitivities seriously because it doesn't have the
hmm
word allergy. Like,
Yeah.
a sensitivity is still an allergy. Can I just explain?
hmm
There's two ways that our bodies can have allergic reactions. One is anaphylaxis, right? That's where you need the EpiPen, you need the adrenaline, your breathing airways close up, they get swollen.
hmm
The other way is anybody out there have spring allergies or fall allergies?
Right.
That's a histamine reaction. You're not going to die from the histamine reaction, but that is also an allergic reaction where your body's
hmm
like, I don't like this thing in my body. It's not going to kill me, but I don't like it. I'm sensitive to it. So your
hmm
body produces histamines. That's why allergy pills are called antihistamines.
Right.
Okay. So the food sensitivities are still allergies. They're just histamine allergies. They're not anaphylactic allergies. So when people
hmm
say to me when I'm at a restaurant, oh, are you going to die if you eat an onion? I'm like, it's still an allergy. I'm not going to die, but it's going to affect me for a week afterwards. And I won't be able to
hmm
function in life if I eat an onion.
Right.
Even though it's not like I'm going to die and need an EpiPen, it means that I can't function. I can't sleep properly. I'm in pain. I'm swollen. I can't do my job properly. I have brain fog. My body's trying to process something out of it
hmm
that is not supposed to be in my body. And that can take 1 to 2 weeks.
hmm
And that really affects the quality of my life. And so we need to take the, I don't like that they're called food sensitivities because I feel like there's something about that word sensitive where people are like, oh, you're sensitive. Oh, too bad.
Mm-hmm.
You're just being sensitive. Get over
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It is still an allergy. It's just an
Mm-hmm.
allergy that's processed in a different way that you're not going to get anaphylaxis about. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's actually some real goodness here is that you know what your needs are around food.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't like these things, I don't think it's you being picky. I think it's your body telling your brain and then your brain telling your mind that, like, my body doesn't react well to these foods. So therefore, I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be eating them.
Right, right.
And that's actually a really powerful thing to know what it is. Because I've
Mm-hmm.
talked to so many people in my life that are like, I didn't realize that I was sensitive to, let's say, gluten, because there's gluten
Right.
allergies and there's
Yeah,
gluten
yeah.
and then there's celiacs. They're two different things, but you can be sensitive. I'm using finger quotation marks here, everybody,
Yeah, yeah,
sensitive,
yeah.
right? To gluten. And like when I stopped eating gluten, I felt better. I didn't have brain fog. I wasn't bloated anymore. I didn't have stomach aches
Mm-hmm.
all the time after eating. That's a massive thing to be carrying. Brain fog, being
Mm-hmm.
bloated and having stomach aches. That's
Yeah.
not healthy. That doesn't feel good. But we're like, oh, it's just a stomach ache. Oh, I just don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to feel the best we can feel in our body. And it's okay to say what your boundaries, needs, and wants are. And
Mm-hmm.
I would challenge you to get rid of the word picky because you're almost judging yourself by saying I'm a picky
Mm-hmm.
eater
Mm-hmm.
to saying I have like dietary needs,
Yeah.
like to reframe it so that when you're telling somebody else, you're not saying, oh, I'm a picky eater. Don't worry about me. I don't want to burden you. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
dietary needs and if you can't meet them, that's okay. I can work around what you're making if I'm over to your house for dinner. Or I can bring a salad to add to the dinner that I like.
Mm-hmm.
Often that's what I do, right? A lot of people work around it, but sometimes my friends, like sometimes at book club, they're like, sorry, Victoria, I couldn't make the tomato sauce without the onions. It's not going to taste as good. So I
Right.
made you like an Alfredo sauce instead or whatever. And I'm like, great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and then like my role is to not feel left out about it and to be heard about it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But
it's like I
yeah.
have dietary restrictions or
But
I
see,
have
I don't
dietary
I
needs.
want to avoid that whole thing. I like I love that this sounds peachy keen and you've like done the work to have that direct communication line. But because
But you want to avoid the communication
I
about
want to
it.
avoid it completely. I want to just not even like I don't
Let me
want
be
someone to
clear.
like
You don't
yeah.
want to avoid that ideally. Your brain wants to avoid it right now.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
I want to be clear that you're not saying
Mm-hmm.
that's not how I want to behave and I want to avoid. What you're
Oh
saying is
yeah.
my brain wants to avoid it right now, but ideally I should be able to say those
Oh,
needs.
oh
Yeah.
yeah. Ideally, I should be. And what I'm saying is like, so like clearly your book club like knows these things about you. And again, is I've expanded it from the picky eating. The picky eating's the root, right? The picky eating and like the shame around being a picky eater, it's the root. But it has now leaked into every other thing that I am particular about. And like I like the word particular over the word picky.
Yeah.
And also like a lot in because the other thing is my my being particular in some areas of my life has brought me great, wonderful, interesting situations, people, friends. Like being that particular has really benefited me in some ways.
But wouldn't it benefit you to be particular about your food so you feel better in your body and your gut and your brain
Hmm.
and all those kinds of things?
Oh yeah, it would be, but then I would actually have to challenge again the two things at once being true.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a particular way I want to be perceived.
You got to let that go.
Oh, I know. And this is gonna, and I mean, 5 seasons in, this is probably like a recurring theme that our regular listeners
Yeah,
are
this keeps
hearing.
rearing its ugly head, right?
And
Like this
it's,
is the
yeah,
thing that comes up. Yeah.
yeah,
But
like I'm,
I also want to say you are getting better at it
mhm.
though. I
Yeah,
do want to say that.
yeah.
But
No,
I
and I
also like
appreciate
want
that.
to like thank you for continuing to bring it up and not saying like, "Oh, I'm
Hmm.
healed from it." Like this is something I'm
Yeah.
still struggling with and I'm still dealing with it. But you are
Hmm.
healing it. You are better at it than you were a year ago or 2 years ago,
Yeah.
right? I want to
Well,
recognize
and
that. But
yeah.
also I want to recognize that it's very like amazing that you keep saying I'm still working on this and it's not where I want
Hmm.
it to be yet.
Yeah, because this
Yeah.
even like this regret did not start with the shame around picky eating. This regret started with the I'm so afraid to be difficult
Yeah.
situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I kept rewriting this regret because is it like am I afraid to be difficult? Well, then where did it come from? Because like there's got to be it can't just be that I'm afraid to be difficult. And when
And
I
so you think
realized
it
that
came
like
from the food thing?
I do, I think that's how it started. And then like
Interesting.
because food is fuel, it's how we live our life. You need to feed yourself every day.
Yeah.
So again, like it's because I'm already so particular about that, that when I do meet someone who is willing to like meet me with those needs, and also they're shifting constantly. And this is also actually related to something my mom did, where like I remember there was a week where in high school, she was still making my lunch. And there was one week where she decided no more because she would buy stuff at the grocery store and I liked it one week and I didn't like it the next.
Yeah.
So that's also like an unfair expectation to expect people to keep track of what I like, what I don't like, because even within my own buying groceries, I change all the time, right?
But how's that different from anyone else? Like if you're at a
I don't
restaurant and you
know.
go to that restaurant and you like, oh, I feel like ordering the spaghetti, and the next time you go to that restaurant, maybe a week later or 2 weeks, you're like, oh, I don't want the spaghetti. I feel like ordering the steak. How's that any different?
Oh,
People are
no, no,
allowed
no.
to change their like what their likes, like what they like and
Yeah.
what they desire.
Yeah, I just, if I'm going to visit, let's say I'm going to visit someone for the weekend and they've bought groceries based on my preferences from like 6 months ago, and now I don't like some of those things, then I just feel bad that they wasted their money and everything else on,
So
you know,
then instead of feeling bad, can you be proactive and say, hey, this is what I'm into right now before you go visit them?
oh my God, that would
I
require
know
so much work.
it's challenging, right? Like
Yeah.
This is interesting. This is actually going to tie into my regret, but
Mm-hmm.
being proactive in life is so important. But
Mm-hmm.
the first step to being proactive before you're proactive is understanding what your boundaries, needs, and wants are, because then you
Mm-hmm.
can be proactive in communicating them.
Totally. And this is where, like, in the regret, where I'm realizing that, like, trying to be more easygoing is actually making it more difficult
Yeah.
because I say, like, okay, yeah, buy whatever, I'll just eat whatever you got. And then I show up and there isn't things for me to eat. And then I'm like, oh, I should have said something.
Yeah. And then you're like, I'm hungry, I'm
Yeah.
ragey, I'm
Yeah.
upset, I'm holding all these things in. People are asking me how I
Hmm.
am. I'm going, I'm fine. Right. Like,
Yeah.
right. So, like, the being proactive thing.
Hmm.
And again, this is gonna tie into my regret today too,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, gosh, if we all learned to actually be able to name our boundaries, needs, and wants, and then to communicate them before,
Hmm.
gosh, our relationships and our lives would go much more smoothly, right?
Right. But everyone's carrying around so much too, right? Like in my regret, where I was talking about, where, like, because I'm so sensitive to rejection, I'm starting to, like, make sure other people don't feel rejected based on my stuff.
Right. But you're not
So,
responsible for them. You're
no,
only
I know.
responsible for you.
And again, that
And
sounds
again, that's your
lovely.
perception. That's your
Yeah.
perception. Like, you are making assumptions about other people without allowing them to communicate it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
When
Mm-hmm.
we start to make assumptions about other people and we mask it by telling ourselves we're trying to protect them, we can
Mm-hmm.
actually be, I'm going to say this word wrong, but infantilizing them.
Right.
We can
Yeah.
be not hearing them, not listening to them, not letting them be themselves when we make
Mm-hmm.
assumptions about what their needs are without letting them tell us what their needs are or their wants are. Or do
Mm-hmm.
you see what I'm saying?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I absolutely understand it, especially because I've seen it firsthand. Like, right? Like I've experienced this where I say, like, this is that or this is this, and then, like, I'm lying and then I can't fix it because I, like, end up painting myself into a corner because I've never been honest about this thing. And now here we are, however far down the line, where I feel like to be honest about this thing would eradicate such a foundational piece of that relationship.
But the things aren't the foundational pieces of the relationship. Someone
Mm.
making you food isn't the foundational pieces
Hmm.
of a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how you connect, how you care for each other, how you listen to each
Hmm.
other, how you support each other, how you love each other, how you have fun together. Those are the foundational pieces of a relationship.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so I have a story for you. So my parents have
Yeah.
been 50 years,
Clap,
right?
clap, 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 clap.
Yeah, 50 years. Last year, okay, and again, my parents are boomers. My dad comes from a generation where he did not learn how to cook. My grandma was a
Hmm.
stay-at-home homemaker and did all the cooking, right? So
Yeah.
later in life, in the past 10, 15 years, my dad's like trying to figure out how to learn to cook. So him and my mom have it even in the kitchen, right? They're both retired now. But like before that,
Hmm.
like, my dad went to work and my mom made dinner, right?
Yeah.
Last year, he's like, I have a confession to make. I don't like cucumbers.
Mm.
Okay. And my mom's like, what? This is my mom's go-to salad with every meal: lettuce, cherry tomatoes, and cucumbers.
Right.
Every dinner, lettuce, cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, maybe a little bit of like shredded cabbage in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, I don't like cucumbers. Their marriage didn't fall apart. My
Yeah.
mom thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
She now puts cucumbers out on the side for my dad, and we have cucumbers. Like,
Hmm.
so what I'm saying is, all the bad things that you think are going to happen are not going to happen.
Yeah. No, I know. But, like, again, if everyone else is also indirectly, like, I don't know. I guess it's also, that's so great. That's so great that that's how that situation went. I will say that. But, like, what if your mom was secretly mad? And now
And
she isn't saying anything. Yeah.
that's my mom's problem to process
Yeah,
that.
that's fair.
That's
Yeah.
my mom's responsibility to process that. And it's my mom's
Mm-hmm.
responsibility to love my dad for exactly who he is. It's not my
Mm-hmm.
dad's responsibility to make my mom feel better for saying what his needs and wants are.
Right. And again, I
That's
guess,
that's my
yeah.
mom's
Mm-hmm.
responsibility.
It's so funny. I know I started this with the picky eating. I really wanted to focus on not the eating, but now we're here. So the other thing I'm thinking is around, like, what about, like, actual nutrition though? right? What if someone is just like, I don't like vegetables, period. And they never like, what if your dad said, I don't like lettuce, I don't like tomatoes, I don't like cucumber. You know what I mean? Like cucumbers is one thing, you can still get what like the vitamins you get from cucumbers you can get from other vegetables. But what if someone is just like saying, I don't want this entire food group and I have no intention on getting the nutrition that that food group gives me?
Then they need to see a dietitian or a nutritionist to figure out where they can get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's okay. And maybe it's taking specific, like I'm going to say this, and this might be a bit controversial, everybody. And again, like
Mm-hmm.
this is for me. This is my belief for me. I
Yeah.
don't believe in a multivitamin. I believe in figuring out what vitamins you need and taking those vitamins.
Mm-hmm.
Because you end up like wasting your money because most multivitamins have things that we get a ton of anyways. Like vitamin
Right.
C, everybody's getting like 1,000% of their vitamin C intake every day.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have two strawberries, that's 100% of your vitamin C intake. You
Right.
don't need to be taking a vitamin C in a multivitamin,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe in like in figuring that out and then, find the other sources because sometimes some foods surprise you. You're like, oh, I didn't know that there was this type of vitamin in this food, or take the
Mm-hmm.
supplements, but
Yeah.
talk to a dietitian or a nutritionist about it and figure it out. Because if it is
Mm-hmm.
actually affecting your health, and this is interesting, this is both sides, either way, it's affecting your health.
Yeah. It's true.
If you're not telling people what your needs and wants are and you're eating the foods that are bad for you, you're causing inflammation, bloating, brain fog, all those things. On the other side, if you're really not going to eat a whole entire food group, then you need to talk to a dietitian or a nutritionist and figure that out too.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, it's affecting your health.
Right. That's true.
And it's not just affecting your physical health, it's affecting your mental and your emotional health. It's also
Mm-hmm.
affecting your social health because it's
Mm-hmm.
affecting the way you interact with people. And let's be
Right.
honest, eating is a big social thing in our society.
Mm-hmm.
We connect and bond with people through sitting around a table and eating food.
Yeah.
I think it's about not that. I mean, back to that quote I said too, like saying what your needs are, standing up for yourself is not being
Mm-hmm.
difficult.
Right. No, I couldn't
That
believe that
it's
you pulled that quote
self-care,
out because,
right? Like
like,
it is not
yeah,
being difficult. And
yeah.
and looking after yourself is not selfish. You are not a difficult person. You are not a selfish person.
Mm-hmm.
You are
Mm-hmm.
a self-actualized and self-aware person. And
Mm-hmm.
that is what leadership is, I will say, just in general, in terms of
Right.
being a leader in your friend groups or just being a leader as a human being. The best is not telling people what to do, but being of service to the world is like being a self actualized person and a self aware person and demonstrating to people what it means to love yourself, to
Mm-hmm.
say what your needs are, to know what your boundaries are, and to be a functional human being. And that's the best we can ask for.
Yeah, for sure. Because yeah, before we move on to your regret, the only other thing I kind of wanted to explore here is like I do this with other things too, where like I overextend myself
Mm.
when a friend is in crisis or a friend needs me or
Yeah,
whatever.
I've seen you do that.
And then I end up resenting that friend and I
Yeah.
avoid their text messages and I don't, so in that way, I then kind of spoil the friendship because they don't know what they
Resent.
did wrong.
Yeah.
They don't know what they did wrong because I didn't tell them. All they know is that I've gotten kind of weird and distant with them. And they can't figure out what it is that they did wrong because I didn't tell them. And I don't plan to tell them because to tell them would be to be
Conflict.
difficult.
But
Yeah.
that's not difficult, right? To tell them is
Mm-hmm.
actually healing. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea of conflict or avoiding conflict, this is how I look at conflict now. And it took me years and years of therapy and healing and all to get to this
Mm-hmm.
place, everybody, to but this is a very freeing place. The percentage of bad things that happen at a conflict is actually very low. And I mean conflict in terms of like a fight with another human being. I'm not talking about war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I'm talking about like how we avoid conflict or saying what our needs are because we don't want to like hurt the other person's feeling or we think, right? But the thing is that I think conflict is always a good thing in relationships because you always come out
Mm-hmm.
on the other side better.
Right.
Like you
Yeah.
always come out on the other side more clear of what your
Mm-hmm.
needs are in the relationship and what the other
Yeah.
person's needs are in the relationship. Like 98% of the time, that conflict is going to heal the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you go through the conflict resolution, you have the conversation, maybe you yell at each other, you listen to each other, and 98% of the time, whatever comes out of that conflict is going to be something better.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're like, screw this relationship's over, that's also better for you because you don't
True.
want a relationship that's not right for you. So really,
Mm-hmm.
kind of conflict, like we are programmed to be so afraid of it. But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is that like it's always better on the other side.
Yeah.
There's always some sort of resolution, some sort of freeing of yourself, some sort of deeper understanding, deeper love. It's always better on the other side. So we should not be afraid of conflict. We
Mm-hmm.
should honor it and lean into it and appreciate it as the opportunity that it is, because it's always an opportunity. Like
Mm-hmm.
98% of the time. I want to say 100%, but I'm not going to. Like
Yeah.
98% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually cause ourselves more problems by avoiding the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that conflict is just saying, oh, I don't like cucumbers.
Mm-hmm.
Because we end up like what we're afraid of rarely happens.
Right.
And I want to point something out too, because you and I both share this in that
Mm-hmm.
people pleasing, like overextending yourself, saying yes to people. That's part of recognition response euphoria,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to give to this person. They're going to recognize me or say thanks. And then I'm going to get a high out of that. But then I'm going to
Totally.
get a low out of that because I'm actually depleting my energy store. So it's part
Mm-hmm.
of like, we talked about this on the podcast before, everybody, but if you're new to the podcast, like it's attached to ADHD. Shadoe has ADHD. I don't have it, but I'm borderline. But there's these two other syndromes that can go along with ADHD or can go along with anxiety or depression or can just be on their own. Is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where you just feel like the
Mm-hmm.
whole world's going to end if you're rejected by the smallest thing. And then there's also recognition response euphoria, which is where get a big high out of like being validated or given a
Mm-hmm.
compliment, but like that high is more than a regular person. And then
Mm-hmm.
you go like all in. So like a friend says, I need help. And you think that's recognition. You're like, oh, they're saying I need help because I'm special and I'm the only one that can help
Mm-hmm.
them. That's
Mm-hmm.
just how your brain works, and my brain
Yeah.
too, right? But the thing is that other people can also help them. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to lean into the high of the recognition response euphoria of
Yeah.
it. And you need to say, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. But this person
Mm-hmm.
might be really good to help you with that. But
Right.
why don't we pull this person in?
Mm-hmm.
Also, like friends would be okay if you're like, this is all I can do. They're like, great. That amount of help
Mm-hmm.
is great for me.
Well, and especially because that means you can get it more consistently, right? Versus these like start and stops where it's like
Yeah.
I give all of myself and then I cut that person off. And then I give all of myself again and then I cut that person off, as opposed to like giving a bit of myself time over time over time where I can be seen as more reliable.
Yeah.
Um, but
And then you
yeah.
end up judging yourself for not being reliable. Like it just goes into a
Mm-hmm.
whole people pleasing shame spiral, right? But,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
saying like, I don't have time this weekend, but I can help you with that next week.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like just finding gentle ways to say it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really that good at that, but maybe I could help you with this instead. Or you can just say, no, I'm busy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm
Well,
really
and
sorry, but I can't.
yeah. I really like what you said there about the like both RSD and RRE, because I think there's also when our own lives get difficult and we don't want to do the work, it's so seductive to take on someone else's.
Yes, because you're getting the recognition
Yeah.
response. You're getting a
Mm-hmm.
serotonin bump. Even if you don't have RE and RSD,
Yeah.
everybody, like
Yeah. Yeah.
you can ignore your own life by helping someone else with their
Mm-hmm.
life. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
getting validated and you feel like
Yeah.
you're the hero. When you can't be the hero in your own life, it's so easy to be the hero in somebody
Mm-hmm.
else's life.
Yeah. It also, helps with like not excuse, well, kind of excuses. Like
Yeah,
if there's
excuses.
something, like if there's something really important that you're procrastinating on, and then it's like, well, my friend needed someone to talk to, and that took 2 hours.
Well,
And then
then I'm the hero, right?
and
I'm
I
the
was so
hero.
tired after that conversation. How could I possibly make progress in this other thing that's
Yeah.
important to me?
If you're depleting your energy that much helping someone
Yeah.
where you can't help yourself and you're affecting your own health on all levels of health, mental, physical, social, all the
Mm-hmm.
things, you can't be spending that energy on the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's probably moms out there listening that are going to fight me on
Right.
saying that.
Right.
And I get it. When you're a mom, you have like human life relying on you. But
Mm-hmm.
I would still say you can still find ways to set boundaries and look after yourself and say no. I still think
Mm-hmm.
that. I still believe that.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good.
Shadoe, this one
I
brought up so much. Yeah. Do you have any last words
I was
about
just
it?
gonna say I don't have last words. I think I've really explored the space here and feel a lot better. Like I said, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that I get better at being a direct communicator, because I know that for me, it's so much more comfortable to not. So that's all
It's
I'll
comfortable
say.
because it's comfortable because it's a pattern that you keep repeating. That's why it's
Mm-hmm.
comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But you can make a new pattern comfortable.
Yeah. Or like we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier with like punting it down the line, right? Like how long is this visit really? If the visit's for 2 days, why am I going to create such a like,
Well, because you're going to
yeah.
have that visit again if it's a family member
Mm-hmm.
or a friend.
Yeah, exactly.
So move into the conflict now and know that
Mm-hmm.
you will always be better on the other side. You will
Mm-hmm.
always feel better on the other side.
Yeah, for
You will.
sure. Yeah.
So get it over with.
Okay.
I know, like that sounds terrible, but it's going to make sense in a second.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And thank you for helping me explore this. And I am now here for you. Do you have any preamble to your story today?
Okay, so mine's just kind of like a generalized one,
Okay.
but it's really funny. And again, we're not lying, everybody. We literally do not tell each other what we're gonna say so that our feedback and our reaction is 100% genuine.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing in this podcast is scripted. All right.
It's
Like we
true.
literally don't know what the other person's going to say, other than
Mm-hmm.
maybe writing out what our regret is. So we say it the way we want to say it. But other than that, nothing is scripted. The conversation we have is not scripted. So
Mm-hmm.
here's my regret. I have something that I want to let go of in order to move forward. And that is avoiding things because of my anxiety. So it's pretty much almost exactly the same, but in some ways is what you're saying. So I don't have like a specific story, but I can see this pattern in my life is that I know that I have anxiety. I know that I have RSD, rejection sensitivity disorder. I know these things, but I need to learn how to be self-aware enough. And I'm learning this now and I'm still in the process of this, but to be self-aware enough to say to myself, I know my brain is playing a trick on me right now. And what could the other perception of this be? Because I have like gone down the rabbit hole of anxiety and convinced myself that people hate me, that people don't want to be my friends. I've lost friendships over it because I've literally convinced myself that nobody likes me. But that's my anxiety playing a trick on me, right? So I guess my regret is letting my anxiety run the show in some ways and then leaning into it, or not even leaning into it. I'm going to say falling down the hole. And part of that regret is not being proactive. So exactly what I've already talked about today is like learning to be okay with being uncomfortable in the conflict and knowing that whatever my anxiety brings me, I'm always going to be better on the other side, because most of that anxiety is a trick that my brain is playing on me. And if I can move into that conflict and move through the anxiety in a safe way with support, or move into that move through it, and at the end be like, I was having anxiety about that and debrief it or whatever it is, I'm going to save myself from the anxiety perpetuating situations and actually making them worse than they actually are. And I've had a pretty bad habit of doing that, where like I will say, okay, I can kind of give a generalized example, but again, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that I used to have a 9 to 5 job. And then that's where I developed my anxiety from, because I had a burnout and I was being overworked. And then there was like a whole, fighting with my employer for, support for that overwhelm. And I convinced myself that nobody else liked me. All of my coworkers hated me. Nobody understood me. Everybody was out to get me. And I do believe some of them were, to be honest with you, like supervisors and things like that. I do believe they were, because it's easy to get petty and like get angry. People know. So I do believe some of them were, but I also believe some of them weren't. And I lost those relationships when I left that job. And I let anxiety run the show. And this might be another interesting conversation or thing to say is I think there's a fine line, or maybe it's a broad line. I'm not sure, but this is what I'm kind of observing in general today in the way people behave or talk about mental illness. It's really great that we're talking about it a lot. It's really great because 15 years ago, it was really stigmatized. We didn't talk about it. But I'm also concerned that the pendulum has swung too far and we're using it as victimhood too much instead of saying, I have this thing, I'm going to get help for it, I'm going to heal from it. And you've all heard me say this before. I don't say I have anxiety. I say I'm a person living with anxiety. And I'm also like hearing language like this. Oh, I'm triggered. Oh, that's PTSD. Like misusing these words a lot, I think is actually perpetuating the stigma more, to be honest, and perpetuating using these things to lean into victimhood more, which I was doing, which I've talked about before. I had a regret where I was like being in victimhood too much. So I guess this is a similar regret, but it's like this one's a bit more specific. And I let that feeling of anxiety run the show instead of using the strategies that I have and the supports that I have to not fall deep into that place. And so the consequence of me like perpetuating that behavior is like losing out on life, is losing out on relationships, losing out on experiences, losing out on feeling light and free and happy and joyful and in control. Is I have to do the work and do the steps, but then recognize what the easy steps are, because there's easy strategies I can do all the time and do them, and being able to be self-aware and talk to myself. So if I don't do that, I'm just going to keep repeating the same pattern. And that's my regret. That's what I'm working on. I'm not going to say that's who I was then and that's just who I am now, because this is, again, same with you, Shadoe, like bringing the same things up so that we can continue these conversations. This is something I'm working on. I think I'm getting better at it. I know I'm getting better at it. I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it. That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Do you want some feedback today?
Yeah, give it to me. Give me some.
Okay. So my first question actually is, have you watched Inside Out 2 yet?
I haven't watched it yet. I haven't watched it yet. I gotta watch it. I gotta watch it. I know we talked about this a couple weeks ago.
I
Maybe that's what
know.
I'll do tonight. I haven't watched it yet. But you can do a
Because
spoiler if you want to
yeah,
do a
yeah, yeah,
spoiler. It's fine.
because this is literally the plot of it. Is
Okay.
that like Riley, the main female character, is developing new emotions, right? She's a teenager, she's a
Yeah.
preteen, like that's where it is. And she's developing new emotions. And one of those emotions is anxiety. And there is a moment in the movie where anxiety has control of the console. Because
Mm-hmm.
remember in the first one, there was the console and the five emotions
Yep.
kind of fight over who gets to run the console, but
Yeah.
mostly Happy does, right? And like, or Joy. Joy is that person's name. So
Mm-hmm.
Joy is the kind of main person. And there's a real big moment where not only is anxiety have control of the console, she has created a situation where none of the other emotions can even get close because she is spiraling around that console.
Yeah. That's right. That's totally right.
Yeah, and when the other emotions finally do like break through and get anxiety to step away from the console, anxiety just looks up really heartbroken and says, "But I was trying to protect her."
Yeah.
And that's what
Yes.
it comes down to. Like anxiety is a protective response.
But in the long run, it's not protecting, right?
No, of
Yeah.
course. And because it blocks out everything else. And again,
Yeah.
it's your brain playing a trick on you. So when it's at the control of the console, not only is that dangerous, but it does create this environment where nothing else can get in. So that's hard, right? And it's only like you said, it's through years of understanding how the brain works, getting trained in brain fitness, doing your own therapy, that you can actually like start to differentiate those things. And I think a lot of people don't take it that next step. So I'm really curious when you talk about people getting kind of stuck in victimhood, are these people maybe just at that first stage of even understanding what anxiety
Yeah.
is and not even understanding the layers and how you can like in your own head look at how your brain does stuff. But that's a skill that both of us have
We had to develop
curated.
that.
We had to
Yeah. No.
develop it. So like, but I, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of
Yeah,
give
I'll
some
agree to
grace to
that.
everyone. Like give
I'll
some
agree
grace
to
to
that too.
you because it's so hard that like because we're so interested in this, when we start to see these things being thrown out like nothing, like people are using these very powerful words like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm triggered, when it's like because I couldn't get my pink
I'm
drink.
triggered because Starbucks didn't have pumpkin
Exactly.
spice lattes. That's not triggering. That's not some,
Exactly.
that's the language that I'm talking about. We're
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
starting to use the therapy language or the language because we're
Mm-hmm.
learning, and it's great. Almost everybody's in therapy now. Like
Mm-hmm.
teenagers are in therapy. Therapy wasn't
Yeah.
an option when I was a teenager.
Oh,
Do you know what I
same.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But then it's going too far and saying, like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing things on social media where I was like, I'm triggered because they ran out of pumpkin spice latte at Starbucks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or I have
Yeah.
PTSD because I missed the subway or what, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not a trigger. That's
Yeah.
not PTSD. That's not anxiety. And
Is
that's like the fine line.
yeah. Is there a way for us to like educate people without gatekeeping it though?
Yeah, that's a
I don't
great
have an
question.
answer. I
I
don't
don't
have an
know
answer. I
either.
just, like, yeah, because that is really annoying to see people just throw out this language over things that are really minor. But if it means that we can actually then have a more complex discussion about like any of it, right? Like if this is how mad you were over not getting your preferred drink, imagine what it's like when this other thing happens. Or
Yeah.
like I don't know where it is, and I don't even have an answer. I I struggle with the idea when anyone ever says the pendulum's gone too far the other way about anything. Like honestly, like it weirdly it's one of my trigger things to be
Yeah.
like, no, because it's everything is a spectrum. Like even a spectrum's a spectrum, right? Like it's just, it's tough because like in a weird way, what I'm hearing from you is you almost want to like protect anxiety in a way. It's not just that anxiety protects you, it's that you want to protect what anxiety is defined as.
Yeah. Maybe define, but I want to protect the people that truly have it
Yes,
so
exactly, right.
that they are not stigmatized
Mm-hmm.
for having it when they
Yeah,
truly do have it.
yeah.
Because when people minimize it by saying, oh, I'm having anxiety because I don't have my pumpkin spice latte, and somebody
Mm-hmm.
else is actually having an anxiety attack out in public. And
Yeah.
then what happens is people start to say, get over it because I can get over
Mm-hmm.
it.
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to protect. I'm trying to protect the real understanding and the support that people that have these things need so that they're not
Mm-hmm.
minimized.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we minimize it, we lose understanding, we
Mm-hmm.
lose compassion.
For sure.
I
Yeah.
guess that's what I'm saying.
And I like that. I like
Yeah.
that a lot more than maybe like adding this extra layer of like just because someone's a beginner at something doesn't mean that they can't use the language. Like again, I don't even have an answer, and this isn't even feedback. This
But
is
I
just one
think
of
you
those
can
things that
use,
I'm
yeah, we're
like,
talking about it now,
I'm
but I
trying to
think you
think
can
about
use
it.
the
Like,
language when it's happening. Like,
mm-hmm,
I still think it's dangerous to you lose the to use the language for something that's, and I get it. We're trying to use the
mm-hmm,
language we're learning. And a lot of these kids that are saying I'm having
mm-hmm,
PTSD because there's no pumpkin spice latte do have anxiety because they've
yeah,
learned the language or they've learned it and they are in therapy. But
mm-hmm,
how do we, it's like crying wolf,
right,
right? The story of the boy who cried wolf.
mm-hmm,
That's what it is.
mm-hmm,
If you're saying I have anxiety all the time, and then when you actually do have anxiety, people are like, well, I've seen you have anxiety over a pumpkin spice latte.
mm-hmm,
And you're like, no, that wasn't anxiety, but this is anxiety and I need help. But then
yeah,
we're like teaching people that really don't understand it to say things like get over yourself.
for
And
sure.
that's
That's
not
actually
helpful.
important. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's tough.
It's developing a lack of compassion. But I also think like there maybe is some goodness in that, what you're saying too. It's not the pendulum swing, and you're right. I should stop using that like analogy, but it's like when society changes, there's a lot of growing pains. And this is like experimenting.
Mm-hmm,
It's experimenting with this language and experimenting with these things.
mm-hmm.
But we need to make sure that when we're experimenting with these things, that we're not losing the point.
That's a much better way, I think, of like playing with this idea is
Yeah.
that it is growing pains. I think that's a much better way of looking at it because yeah, that gives people room to explore it, I think, without
Mhm.
feeling like, but yeah, like the perpetuating victimhood, like we all want extra. That's the thing right now, I think, not just because we're understanding more mental health. I think we're living in unprecedented times all
Yeah.
the time, right? Like
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like every time I turn on the news, they're like unprecedented event. And it's like, how can everything be unprecedented?
Yeah,
It must
climate
just be,
change, the way people are
yeah,
reacting,
yeah, like
fake
COVID.
news,
COVID
COVID,
really
all these
put
things.
all,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's all these things around it, but like, so like maybe people are, maybe everyone is at like a new base level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Like I think like we're in the 2020s and it's hard. It's
It's not
hard
back
for
to the future.
everyone. It's yeah, it's becoming much more difficult and everyone wants extra sympathy and no one wants to give extra sympathy. And it's really hard to see our society crumble this way.
Can I can I put two things out there?
Yeah, please.
What do you think it was like during World War II?
Tough.
Like, do you know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
saying like, yes, we're in unprecedented times. There's
Mm-hmm.
also been other unprecedented times in the history of humankind, right?
Yeah.
Where people are feeling anxiety and trying to navigate it. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to answer that. I'm just putting it there. But the other thing I
Yeah.
want to say is I think there's a spectrum of like
Mm-hmm.
my anxiety was taking control and perpetuating things and making it worse and making my victimhood worse without me knowing it
Mm-hmm.
versus you can at some point become conscious that you're using anxiety as an excuse and being a victim instead of using it to that acknowledgement that you have it to heal. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I'm wording this the
Mm-hmm.
right way, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I mean,
And
so
like yeah, part of my regret is that like and that's a good place where I can say that's who I was then and that's who I am now because I didn't have the knowledge I have now. But I look back and I'm like, oh man, I really leaned into that and I really like let things get out of hand. But I didn't let things get out of
mm-hmm.
hand. Like that's what I was doing. And that's like a different kind of victimhood than like
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's
than like
definitely different.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
just that's it's just kind of what I wanted to like look at. So is there any like specific situation that you're currently avoiding due to anxiety?
You know, it's a great question. I had an appointment with my psychiatrist yesterday and there
Mm-hmm.
isn't.
Wow.
And he
Okay.
was like, yeah. He's like, Victoria, you're doing really well. I'm really proud of you. You are like in control,
Mm.
not in control in a bad way, but he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, see you in a month when there's no sunlight and we'll see what happens when my SAD sets in.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
like I was like, yeah, like I'm feeling good. And like maybe that should have been my cause for applause because how often do you go to your therapist and they're like, you're doing great.
Right. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I was like, doing great. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really
Mm-hmm.
proud of myself. I have resolved some things in the past few months. I've dealt with some things and I've walked through anxiety and I've made apologies and I've done things. And I, from
Mm-hmm.
this realization of what my regret is today, I think. So I'm like kind of on this like path, but yeah, but that's a
Yeah.
great question. But I think if you had asked me that like 2 months ago, I probably could have listed three things. But
Hmm.
what I've done is I've actually done a lot of work in the past 2 months to lean into some of these things and resolve them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, through the conflict comes the resolution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But thank you for asking that because if you ask me that again in a month, I might have something else to tell you. So,
For sure. And
right.
I
But
think that is the difference too, is that like some people just use anxiety as a way to like you're saying, like they just kind of evade any kind of responsibility. Where you're saying like there are situations in my life where I'm falling into this avoidance pattern.
yep.
And I know that's because of my anxiety. And like so that is a huge difference. But we have to allow room for people to get there. And if
Yeah.
that means
Yeah.
they're saying they have PTSD because, there's not enough snow by Halloween anymore. Like
Right. Exactly.
that's
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 what I
not a
mean.
thing. Like,
Instead, just
but
say, I'm upset that there's climate
yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah.
we can use other language, but
Yeah. Yeah. So I hear you. And that's why I really wanted to make sure we still came back to that because I do absolutely hear you on it being annoying. It is annoying to hear people use language that you worked so hard to understand and comprehend and apply to your life. And people are just throwing it out like it's slang. And it's not
yeah. And
slang.
it's
It's
not slang.
important.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you for
important.
that word. It's
So
not slang.
Yeah.
But again, I hear you on what you're saying. It's important that people are experimenting with expressing
Mm-hmm.
their neurodivergencies, mental health, and that sort of thing too, so that we do
Yeah.
break the stigma. So I think like there's like a combination of both things in this conversation is
Mm-hmm.
where do we find acceptance
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
compassion and support and healing. And
Mm-hmm.
we're still working on it as a society and we're still working on it as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting too because again we just I don't know, we get into autopilot mode and all of this stuff fades away, right? Like all of this extra compassion, all of this other stuff, like when we get down and out, it all just starts to fade away and we forget about them. So it's good to keep talking about it and keep it top of mind for everybody. Someone was using an example where they were on the highway and they came up on a car and like the car had a bumper sticker that was like nervous driver, please be nice or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And before they caught up to that driver, they already had created such a narrative about like
Yeah.
what is
Why is
this
this
car
person
doing?
driving
Why is
so
so
slow? You're in the
slow?
wrong lane. I
And they were
totally do
already in
that.
the slow lane. Like this person was already
Yeah.
in the slow lane, but then
Yeah.
as soon as they did catch up to this person and they saw the sticker, they had to like really be like, "Oh, okay, yeah." Like but like why did that driver need a sticker in order to gain that sympathy? Like why can't we just automatically be like,
Yeah.
"That car is driving really slow. They must be nervous." We just go to that person's in my way, even if they're not in our lane, or that person must be a terrible driver. Like we don't, it's so interesting. And I don't know how to marry these two thoughts. Like I don't,
Yeah.
I see it all the time. And I've told this story before on the podcast where like I had a coworker I really didn't like in the first like 3 weeks to month that I worked with them. And then I found out that their grandmother died, and my entire perception of that person changed.
Yeah.
And like it was unfair of me to expect them to tell me that. And I didn't
Yeah.
like, but like,
We
why
need
did
to
I
give
need it?
people grace.
Why did I need that to give the person the extra space? Because to
Yeah.
me, this person was just really annoying. Like they were annoying. They didn't laugh at my jokes. I'm really funny. Laugh at my jokes, okay? Uh, but like they weren't because they couldn't laugh at anything. They were emotionally destroyed, and
Yeah.
I couldn't give them that. I just went, ugh. I guess that like they're new and they don't like me, and I create this narrative and
Why
like,
is this person so hard to figure out? What's wrong
mm-hmm,
with them?
mm-hmm,
Yeah, we need to
mm-hmm.
give people grace. And I'm sure there's like some clinical term for it now or some definition, but this
Yeah.
is part of it, I think, stems from like being able to sit behind a computer and like make comments
Oh, right.
on
Yeah.
people's things,
Yeah.
right? It's like what we need to do and what I try so hard to do. And I'm not 100% great at it, but I'm working really hard at it. It's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you just said. What's the benefit of the doubt? And this is again, this is my argument for conflict.
Mm-hmm.
When you step into conflict with someone and you're forced to talk back and forth, not through text message, to talk back and forth, you realize that you're talking to another human being who is
Mm-hmm.
complex, just like you're complex.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we see someone as one thing or we make them one thing in our mind, we dehumanize them. They're no longer a
Mm-hmm.
human being. They're that
Mm-hmm.
thing. They're an
Yeah.
angry person.
Mm-hmm.
They're the bad guy. They're whatever, right? And that's what my anxiety can do. It can make me label
Mm-hmm.
people, right? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Every human being's complex. Every human being has reasons they're a nervous driver or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we're disconnected from people, the less we see them as human beings and the less compassion we have. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that's my argument for leaning into conflict because you learn and then you heal and then you
Mm-hmm.
resolve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Very cool. Do you have any last words regarding this share today or anything else we've covered throughout this episode?
This did not go where I thought it was going to go. And this was an awesome episode. And I'm so proud of you for being vulnerable. And I'm also proud of myself for being vulnerable.
Excellent.
Like I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today,
Mm-hmm. Me
Shadoe. I
too.
really, really did. I love you so much. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Great.
And hey, you out there listening, I hope you enjoyed it too, because I hope it planted some seeds in your brain and got you thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the best we can hope for is that people get thinking and start to make changes in their life for the better. So yeah, this was a good
Mm-hmm.
one. Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate you.
you. I appreciate you as well.
Yeah.
Shall we get into our breaths?
Let's get into our breaths, everybody.
All
Again,
right.
at the very beginning of the episode, I was talking about what are really simple strategies that you can do. 3 breaths. The reason I call it 3 breaths is it is 3 breaths, but it's more about what you're saying to yourself, because how you talk to yourself matters. And that's why we have a different 3 breaths every couple months or every season or however we do it. Is we want to just teach you some phrases that you can talk to yourself with. And when you do it along with breathing, it gives you a rhythm to it. It gives you like a practice to it or a process to it. But it really is about how we're talking to ourselves and the specific words we're using. So you notice in these 3 breaths, everybody, I'm using words like I am choosing to or I am committing to. And the reason I'm starting, we can call them affirmations. I don't like calling them affirmations, but the reason I'm starting those statements with that is that the brain can't fight back. It's not going to say, no, you're not. If you're saying, I am choosing to believe this, or I am committing to do this, that's when language works with the brain. And that's why most affirmations don't work. So again, if you're a new listener, go back and listen to past episodes and listen to what the other 3 breaths are. Every 10 episodes or so, we change what the 3 breaths are. And this is our second time doing these 3 breaths. So come onto the front edge of your seat, everybody. If it is safe for you to do so, put your feet flat on the floor so that you can feel connection to the earth and feel grounded. Just by doing that, you're telling your brain that you're safe and that you're stable. Please do that if it's safe to do so. If you're driving, keep driving. And if it's safe to do so, close your eyes. You can place a hand on your heart or your belly if you want to. And just take a big breath in and a long exhale out. And as you're exhaling, say to yourself, I am choosing to believe that I am worthy just because I exist, just because I am. Taking another big inhale and a nice long exhale, saying to yourself, I'm committing to being kind in the way that I talk to myself each and every day. And on this last breath, taking an inhale in and a long exhale out, I'm committing to being aware of my day and finding the small moments of joy and connection in the everyday, ordinary things in my life so that I can heal, feel connected, and feel joy. Thank you so much for joining us every day every day. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'm not going to cut that.
That's
Thank you
okay.
so much for joining us, everybody, for this really great conversation today. And we hope you continue listening. We hope you continue to support us. Thank you for those of you that have supported us on Buzzsprout, that are making financial contributions, that are giving us 5-star ratings, that are telling your friends about it. All of those ways are ways that you can support us if you think that the work we're doing here is valuable. I do. I think you're valuable, Shadoe, just because you are. I know that I am worthy just because I am. And you are too out there listening. You are valuable just because you are too. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will be with you in the next one. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
This episode of Let's Relieve Regret was produced by Shadoe Ball and Victoria Muir-Bercia.
Editing by me, Victoria Muir-Bercia.
We are an independent podcast supported by you, our listeners.
If you think this podcast sends a valuable message, you had an aha moment, or learned something new about yourself, help us realize our goal of reaching as many listeners as possible.
We encourage you to take action and support us right now by choosing one of the following options.
You can easily support us by
following us on Instagram at relieve.regret.
Tell 2 friends.
Leave a 5-star review on whatever app you're listening to us on.
Leave a tip at coffee.com/Let's Relieve Regret podcast. That's ko-fi.com/Let's Relieve Regret podcast.
Join our conversations in the Facebook group, Let's Relieve Regret Podcast.
Find all this information, all the links, and more in the podcast notes. Okay, bye.
Bye.